When German prisoners of war were marched into American-controlled camps during the bitter winters of 1944 and 1945, many of them were already half-frozen, malnourished, and mentally prepared for the worst because Nazi propaganda had drilled into them the belief that capture by the Americans would mean exposure, humiliation, and deliberate cruelty. And as icy winds cut through their thin, worn uniforms, often little more than threadbare tunics and patched boots, they whispered to one another that they would be left to freeze as punishment for the war Germany had lost. Yet what happened next stunned them so deeply that many later described it as the moment their understanding of the enemy collapsed entirely. Upon arrival at the camps, American quartermasters took one look at the prisoners and immediately began issuing heavy wool overcoats, thick blankets, gloves, and in some cases surplus leather flight jackets. Items that many German soldiers had not seen in years due to shortages on the eastern and western fronts. And as these garments were handed out methodically, without shouting or mockery, some POWs hesitated to put them on, convinced they were being tested or tricked, because the idea that the enemy would provide warmth to defeated soldiers seemed impossible after years of deprivation. Eyewitness accounts described German soldiers running their hands over the thick wool in disbelief, breathing into their frozen fingers as warmth slowly returned, while others simply stood still, coats draped over their shoulders, overwhelmed by the sudden contrast between what they expected and what they were receiving. And for Luftwaffe and Army veterans alike, the leather jackets in particular carried a symbolic weight because they represented quality, durability, and abundance. Things that had vanished from Germany long before the war ended. American guards, following strict POW regulations under the Geneva Convention, made no speeches and offered no explanations, simply ensuring that each prisoner was properly clothed before being assigned quarters, while medics inspected frostbite, trench foot, and hypothermia, conditions rampant among retreating German units who had marched for weeks without adequate winter gear. Later interviews revealed that some POWs were emotionally shaken by the experience, admitting that they had mentally prepared themselves to die of cold or illness in captivity, only to find themselves warmer and safer behind barbed wire than they had been while fighting for the Reich, a realization that carried a deep psychological impact, especially for soldiers who had believed until the end that Germany would care for its own. In the barracks, men compared coats, shared gloves, and quietly reflected on the irony that their enemy possessed not only superior firepower, but also the logistical strength and discipline to clothe defeated soldiers humanely. And for many, that warmth seeped deeper than the skin, eroding years of indoctrination that painted Americans as brutal and uncivilized. Diaries recovered after the war described nights where German POWs slept fully clothed in issued coats, not out of fear, but out of disbelief, waking repeatedly to confirm that the warmth was real, while others wrote that the simple act of being protected from the cold restored a sense of dignity they had lost during the war's final collapse. Historians note that American POW policy was intentionally structured to demonstrate order, restraint, and moral authority, yet the emotional effect it had on prisoners was profound and unintended, as acts like issuing winter clothing forced captured soldiers to confront the reality that the regime they served had failed to provide even basic necessities, while the enemy they feared upheld international law. As winter dragged on, the coats and jackets became everyday items, worn during roll calls, work details, and medical visits. Yet the memory of receiving them never faded, because that moment marked a turning point where survival replaced fear and humanity replaced expectation. Long after the war, former German POWs repeatedly cited the day they were given warm clothing as one of the most unforgettable experiences of captivity. Not because it erased guilt or suffering, but because it revealed that even in a war defined by brutality and destruction, small acts of decency could cut through years of hatred and propaganda. And for men who had marched into captivity expecting cold, punishment, and neglect, the weight of a wool overcoat and the smell of a leather jacket became enduring symbols of an enemy who chose restraint over revenge and warmth over cruelty, reminding history that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not force, but the quiet refusal to abandon humanity when it matters most.